What if the universe wrote your story before you were born? There is a practice so ancient that it predates every major religion, every philosophical tradition, every scientific institution that has ever existed. A practice that was used by the Babylonians to predict the seasons, by the Egyptians to align their temples, by the Greeks to map the human soul, by the Romans to guide their emperors, by the Renaissance philosophers to understand the mind, and by Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, to explore the deepest structures of the human psyche. It has been dismissed, ridiculed, declared unscientific, and reduced to a paragraph in a magazine that tells you whether today is a good day to ask for a raise. And yet it refuses to disappear. Astrology. Not the astrology of daily horoscopes and vague personality summaries. Not the astrology that tells you Scorpios are intense and Geminis are two-faced. But the astrology that has been practiced by serious minds across 5,000 years of human civilization. The astrology that asks not what will happen to you, but who you are, where you came from, and what this life is asking of you. That astrology is something else entirely. And it begins with a question that no one has ever fully answered. Why does the moment of birth matter? Because that is the central claim of astrology. Not that the planets cause events, not that celestial bodies reach across space and physically alter the course of human lives, but something subtler, something stranger, something that the physicist and the philosopher and the contemplative practitioner all approach from different directions without quite touching. The claim is that the pattern of the cosmos at the moment you entered it, the positions of the planets, the angle of the sun, the phase of the moon, the precise degree of the zodiac rising on the eastern horizon, is not separate from who you are, that you and the universe are not two different things, one inside the other, but aspects of a single pattern expressing itself at every scale simultaneously, that the map of the sky at the moment of your birth is, in some profound and still poorly understood sense, a map of you. This is not a new idea. It is one of the oldest ideas in human civilization. The word astrology comes from the Greek, astron, meaning star, and logos, meaning word, reason, or meaning. The study of the meaning of the stars. And for most of human history, this was not considered separate from astronomy. The same people who mapped the movements of celestial bodies with extraordinary precision, who predicted eclipses, who calculated the length of the year, who understood the retrograde motion of the planets centuries before the telescope, were also the people who believed that those movements were meaningful, that the cosmos was not a machine indifferent to human existence, but a living, intelligible order in which everything was connected to everything else. The separation of astronomy from astrology is a relatively recent development, and it may have cost us something, because what astrology preserved, through all the centuries of dismissal, through all the paradigm shifts of modern science, is a vision of the human being as embedded in the cosmos, not as an observer of the universe, separate from it, looking at it from outside, but as an expression of it, a particular configuration of the same forces and patterns that move the planets and shape the seasons and govern the tides. The idea that you are not in the universe is in you, which is, of course, exactly what we have been exploring throughout this channel from a completely different direction. Because quantum physics tells us that everything in the observable universe emerged from the same initial state, that every particle, every atom, every structure was once a single unified system. That entanglement, the invisible connection between particles that have interacted, does not simply vanish with distance. That at the deepest level of reality, separation is not fundamental. That what we experience as distinct, independent objects in empty space is a large-scale approximation of something far more interconnected. And astrology, in its deepest form, is pointing at the same thing, not through mathematics, through meaning. Carl Jung called it synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of inner and outer events that cannot be explained by ordinary causation. Two things happening at the same time that are not connected by cause and effect, but by meaning. The dream you have the night before an unexpected encounter. The thought that arrives at the same moment as the phone call. The symbol that appears in your inner world at the same time it appears in the outer one. Jung did not think synchronicity was supernatural. He thought it was a feature of reality that materialism had no framework to accommodate. And astrology, in Jung's understanding, was a map of synchronistic patterns, a way of reading the correspondence between the movements of the cosmos and the movements of the inner life, not because the planets cause the inner life, but because the inner life and the outer cosmos are aspects of the same underlying pattern, expressing themselves simultaneously at different scales. As above, so below, not as superstition, as a structural observation about the nature of reality. And when you sit with this seriously, not as a believer, not as a skeptic, but as someone genuinely curious about what 5,000 years of careful human observation might have accumulated, something interesting begins to emerge. Because the people who practiced astrology across those millennia were not primitive. They were not confused. They were not simply inventing stories to explain a frightening world. They were pattern recognizers, careful observers, people who watched the sky for generations, who correlated celestial movements with earthly events, who built systems of extraordinary complexity and internal consistency that have survived. Through every cultural transformation, every scientific revolution, every age of dismissal, because something in them kept proving useful to the people who used them, not as prediction, as mirror, as a language for understanding the self. And perhaps that is the most honest way to approach what this series will explore. Not asking whether astrology is literally true in a scientific sense, whether the position of Mars on the day you were born physically determines your temperament, but asking something more interesting, more useful, more aligned with what careful attention to your own experience actually reveals. What if the birth chart is not a prediction? What if it is a portrait? A portrait of the particular configuration of energies and tendencies and potentials that you brought into this life. A map not of what will happen, but of who is here, of what this particular expression of the universe, this precise arrangement of consciousness and matter that is you, is oriented toward, drawn to, challenged by, and called to become. Not fate, but nature. And understanding your nature, deeply, honestly, without flattery and without excuse, may be one of the most useful things a human being can do, which is why, across 5,000 years and every major civilization, people kept looking up, not for answers written in the sky, but for a reflection of what was already written within. And in the next video, we will begin that exploration with the most fundamental element of the birth chart, the one that most people already know and almost no one truly understands. The sun, not as a personality type, but as the deepest expression of who you are here to become.